There's a version of bullying happening in schools that nobody measures, nobody reports, and almost nobody talks about. And it's not coming from the student.
I don't know if this is like a universal experience, but in secondary school I had teachers that would like pick on students more than others. Now that I'm 21, I would never beef with a 14-16-year-old. When I think back about all the teachers that pick on students back in secondary school, I'm like, how are you fighting with a child? How are you, as a full-grown secondary school teacher, beefing with a secondary school student? Like some 15-year-old, you're beefing with some 15-year-old. And I think it's crazy how some teachers just pick a student and decides to make their school life harder for them. Like, that's a child! Okay, maybe this is not common, but this was like pretty common in my secondary school. So, I don't know, let me know if you guys had traumatic experiences with your teacher bullying you, because I did.
Just saying out loud what a lot of people spend years thinking but never said. How are you, a grown adult, credentialed professional, beefing with a 15-year-old? That's a real question. And the fact that so many people immediately recognize what she's describing, that should tell us something. Because she's describing something real. Something a lot of us actually lived. A teacher who decided for whatever reason that a particular student was the problem and just made the student's life harder every single day. Not because it helped anyone, not because it served any educational purpose, but because they could. Is this really happening? Yes. How common is it? More than you would think. And why are we talking about it? Is what I want to get into today. I went to secondary school and honestly, I didn't see anything extreme. What I noticed was more subtle than that. Certain teachers just seemed to have less patience with certain students, the one with bad grades, the one who caused troubles, a little less willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, nothing dramatic, nothing you could point and say, that's clearly wrong. But I also know that what I didn't see doesn't mean it wasn't happening somewhere else. My school, my classroom, that's just one data point. And the research we're about to get into suggests that in a lot of other classrooms, in a lot of other schools, what students experienced was a lot more than just a teacher being slightly impatient. Before we go further, we need to define something. What exactly is teacher bullying? Because that's an important distinction between a strict teacher and a bullying one. Researchers who have studied this, specifically the peer-reviewed scoping review published in the International Journal of Bullying Prevention, stated, identify teacher bullying as repeated behavior involving deliberate accumulation in front of peers, persistent sarcasm directed at specific students, scapegoating, disproportionate punishment, harsh criticism unrelated to performance, ignoring or excluding particular students, and taking personal frustrations out on children in the classroom. In plain language, it is when adults in the room use their authority not to teach, but to harm, repeatedly, intentionally, toward the same person. Do any of those behaviors sound familiar to you? Because I think for a lot of people watching this, they do. Now let's look at the numbers, because this is where it gets serious. In the United States, a study of over 10,000 high school students found that approximately 1 in 20 reported being bullied by a teacher in past school year. That is roughly the same rate as peer bullying in the same population. Two things we treat completely differently. One's a national crisis, one barely a conversation, happening at the exact same frequency. Norway, which runs mandatory annual national surveys specifically tracking teacher bullying, found that between 2022 and 2023, reported rates increased across every single grade level. Among 10th graders, it went from 2.5% to 3.8% in 1 year, a 52% relative increase in 12 months in a country with strong laws and a political will to measure this. Now in my country, a 25 episode survey on bullying in Malaysia found that among parents whose child experienced school bullying, 21% reported their child had experienced bullying by the teacher or staff member, not by other students, but adults employed to protect them. And yet, globally, there is still no standardized mechanism for most countries to even track this separately from peer bullying. The data we have is partial, which means the real number is almost certainly higher. If awareness of bullying has increased dramatically over the last 2 decades, and it has, why hasn't this gone away? That's a question worth sitting with, and the answer, I think, is uncomfortable. What kind of system produces a teacher who bullies students? Think about it. A teacher is managing 30 students, often with inadequate resources, under pressure to hit performance targets, with very little institutional support for their own mental health. Burnout in the teaching profession is not a new problem. It is a widespread, documented crisis in education systems worldwide. A person who is overwhelmed, who feels unseen, who carries stress with no outlet, sometimes the path of least resistance is to take it out on the person in the room who has the least power to push back. There's not an excuse, but it is apparent. Then there is bias. Research consistently shows that the students most likely to be targeted are those who are already perceived as problems. the ones with lower grades, the ones from disadvantaged backgrounds, the teacher has often already formed a narrative about the student. And once the narrative exists, every behavior confirms it. What incentives are in place to interrupt that? In most systems, very few. Complaints from students are often dismissed, parents who escalate are seen as difficult, and the teacher unit structures that exist in many countries, which, while serving important purposes, can also make it extraordinarily difficult to hold any individual educator accountable. What happens to the teacher who is overwhelmed, under-supported, carrying bias they may not even be aware of, and facing zero meaningful accountability? We already know the answer. So is it getting better? Based on the evidence, no. Norway's numbers are going out. Malaysia's own survey data shows that 72% of school bullying victims took no action at all. 72%. That means the vast majority of cases, including those involving teachers, never reach any official channel. And think about why that is. When a person doing the bullying is another student, a child might feel that they can tell a teacher. But when the person doing the bullying is the teacher, who do you tell? The principal who hired this person? The school, which has very institutional reason to protect its own? You're the 12 years old, navigating a power structure that was not designed to hear you. Fewer than 30% of all the students report bullying to any adult at school. Even in the best of circumstances, the number drops further when an adult is the source of the harm. This is not a reporting failure, it is a system failure. Cultural normalization tells children, and has always told children, that certain forms of teacher behavior are just part of school. The toughness is good for you, that a strict teacher is better than a soft one. These framings absorb a great deal of harm that should never have been tolerated. So what do you actually do with this? If you're a student going through it right now, write it down. Date what happened, who was there, not because school always add on it, but because having a record changes what you can say and to who. Talk to someone outside of the classroom, a parent, a counselor, anyone who isn't part of the same system. If you're a parent, when your kid tells you your teacher has it out for them, don't default to, I'm sure it's not that bad. Kids rarely make out a sustained specific parent about a specific adult. Take it seriously before you decide it isn't. And if you're watching this and you're currently in a classroom, as a student, as a teacher, as anyone, just ask the honest question. Is what's happening in that room discipline, or is it targeting? Discipline is consistent. It applies to everyone. Targeting follows one person, and it doesn't stop. This is a real problem. The data confirms it. It's happening in Malaysia, in the US, in Norway, in every country where anyone has bothered to look. And the reason it persists is partly because the people inside those classrooms on both sides have been taught to treat it as just how school works. It isn't, and it doesn't have to be. See you in the next episode.